Venice is one of the most photographed cities on earth. Millions of people come here every year searching for the same thing: romance, beauty, history, and the version of Venice they've already seen online 1,000 times before. The gondolas, the perfect sunsets, the crowded cafes around St. Mark's Square, the fantasy version of Venice. But the strange thing is, the real Venice begins exactly where most tourists stop looking, because once the crowds disappear, once the souvenir shops close, once you leave the main streets behind, Venice becomes something completely different. Not a theme park, not an Instagram backdrop, a real city, and maybe one of the strangest cities ever built. Most people experience Venice through only a few locations: Rialto Bridge, St. Mark's Basilica, the Grand Canal, and to be fair, they're beautiful, but they're also crowded almost every hour of the day, especially now. Venice receives millions of visitors every year, while the number of actual residents living in the historic center keeps shrinking. Some locals say the city is slowly turning into a museum. Others say it already has. And when you first arrive here, it's easy to understand why. You step out into narrow streets filled with tourists dragging luggage across stone bridges, restaurants with identical menus, souvenir stands selling Venetian masks made nowhere near Venice. For many visitors, that becomes their entire impression of the city. But Venice changes very quickly once you start walking without a destination. One of the strangest things about Venice is that silence exists only a few streets away from chaos. You can leave a crowded tourist area, turn one corner, cross one small bridge, and suddenly hear almost nothing. No cars, no motorcycles, no traffic lights, only footsteps, water, distant voices echoing through the canals. At night, the silence becomes even more surreal. Venice after dark feels less like a city and more like a memory. Street lamps reflect on black water, boats move slowly through empty canals. Windows glow softly above narrow alleyways. And for the first time, you begin to understand why Venice affects people so emotionally, because this city doesn't feel modern, it feels suspended somewhere outside normal time. What most tourists never notice is that Venice is still a functioning city. People live here, children go to school here, groceries arrive by boat, deliveries happen by water, garbage collection happens by water, even ambulances are boats. Everything about daily life in Venice is adapted to the canals. And once you notice that, the city becomes much more interesting. The Vaporetto system, Venice's public water buses, suddenly stops feeling like a tourist attraction and starts feeling like a subway network floating on water. Locals stand quietly at stations waiting for boats the same way people wait for trains in London or Tokyo. Workers carry boxes through narrow alleyways before sunrise. Small bakeries open early in the morning while the streets are still empty. This side of Venice rarely appears online because it's not optimized for social media, but it's probably the most authentic part of the city. And then there are the neighborhoods tourists often skip completely, places like Castello or Cannaregio, areas where Venice slows down. You still find canals and beautiful bridges, but without the constant pressure of crowds moving through every street. Laundry hangs between buildings, neighbors talk through open windows, local bars fill quietly in the evening. In these areas, Venice feels less like a global destination and more like a small island community trying to survive inside one of the most famous cities in the world. And survival has become increasingly difficult. Living in Venice is expensive. Tourism dominates the economy. Many apartments have become short term rentals. Over the years, thousands of residents have left, some because of cost, some because daily life became exhausting, others because Venice increasingly feels designed for visitors rather than locals. At the same time, tourism is also the reason Venice survives economically, and that contradiction exists everywhere in the city. Venice needs visitors, but too many visitors slowly damage the very thing people come here to experience. That tension defines modern Venice, and you can feel it, especially during the daytime. By afternoon, certain areas become almost impossible to walk through comfortably. Lines form everywhere, restaurants raise prices, water buses become overcrowded. Many first time visitors leave Venice feeling disappointed because they only experience this version of the city, the overcrowded version. And honestly, if that's all you saw, you'd probably think Venice is overrated too. But Venice rewards people who slow down. Early mornings here feel completely different. Before the crowds arrive, the city becomes calm and almost cinematic. You hear water hitting the walls of the canals, workers setting up shops, church bells echoing through empty streets. Even famous locations feel transformed. And at night, Venice changes again. This might actually be the best time to experience the city. Once the day tourists leave, the atmosphere becomes quieter, darker, and far more mysterious. The reflections in the canals become sharper, footsteps echo longer. The city feels ancient again, almost unreal. This is the Venice many people remember most strongly after visiting. There's also something psychologically strange about Venice. The city constantly disorients you. The streets twist unpredictably, alleys end suddenly at canals. Google Maps often becomes useless. You stop navigating efficiently and start wandering instead. And maybe that's part of Venice's magic. Modern cities are usually built for speed. Venice isn't. Venice forces you to slow down, to get lost, to notice details, to walk without knowing exactly where you're going. And in a world optimized for efficiency, that feels increasingly rare. Of course, Venice isn't perfect. It's expensive, crowded, touristic, sometimes exhausting. There are tourist traps everywhere, restaurants charging absurd prices near major landmarks, gondola rides most locals would never pay for themselves. And yes, parts of Venice can absolutely feel artificial. But reducing Venice to a tourist cliche misses something important because underneath the crowds, underneath the souvenir shops, underneath the Instagram version of the city, there's still a real place here, a fragile one, a complicated one, but still real. And maybe that's why Venice stays with people long after they leave. Not because it's perfect, but because nowhere else feels quite like it. A city with no roads, a city slowly fighting the sea, a city balancing beauty, tourism, history, and survival all at once. Venice can feel overwhelming during the day, but late at night or early in the morning, when the streets empty and the canals become quiet again, you briefly see something different. Not the Venice from postcards, the real Venice. And once you see that version of the city, it becomes much harder to forget.